Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, Brownfield's Story to Tell, hosted by NJIT Technical Assistance to Brownfield Communities, or NJIT TAB. We're excited to have you all here, and thank you for taking the time out of your day to spend it with us, expanding your Brownfield knowledge. My name is Fatima Matos, and I am the events coordinator here at NJIT's Center for Community Systems. Mimi Marcus, our manager for marketing and engagement, and I will be helping to facilitate today's webinar. Before we get started, I want to first go over some ground rules. 1. This session will be recorded. All recordings and presentations shown today will be available on our website at www.njit.edu/tab. 2. Although you're muted, you can utilize the chat feature for comments and to check in with our other participants. To test the waters, if everyone could just put into the chat, where are you joining us from today? Let us know what state you're coming from so we could see where everyone's from. 3. The Q&A module is reserved for questions to our speaker and moderators. You can upvote on questions posed by others to boost them in the queue. Following the presentation, there will be about 10 minutes dedicated to any questions or comments which have not been addressed during the talk. At that time, those who have asked questions via the Q&A module will receive messages in the chat to verify if you'd like to ask your questions directly, or our panelists may just verbally call upon you. Mimi and I will be fervently searching for your name in the list to allow you to unmute yourself to ask your question. So, to review, type questions in the Q&A window and comments in the chat window. Both of those boxes can be found at the bottom of your screen. If there's a question that can't be answered today, feel free to visit our LinkedIn event page for today's webinar, where we can connect and answer those questions for you. Feel free to also engage further in discussion there as well. I'm sure there are attendees here today that have a vast wealth of knowledge on different areas of brownfield storytelling. Continue the conversation and learning after today's webinar. Or, if you run into any technical issues during today's webinar, or if you know of any attendees that are having trouble accessing this webinar, feel free to email me at fm392@njit.edu. I'll be monitoring my email and provide technical assistance as needed. 5. Lastly, at the end of this webinar, you will be directed to a feedback survey. Our goal is to serve brownfield communities to the best of our ability. We would love to hear your thoughts so that we may provide resources and materials that align with your goals and needs. If you have an idea for a future webinar regarding a topic you're interested in, feel free to provide that feedback as well. We want to create content that works for you. Now, those rules out of the way, we could begin. It is my pleasure to introduce our two experts for today. Our first expert, Elise Molleur, has a background in due diligence and environmental consulting. She assists communities in understanding the technical phases of brownfield redevelopment while providing guidance and support through communal plans and actions. She currently serves as the Brownfield Redevelopment Specialist for NJIT TAB. Using her knowledge of brownfield redevelopment mixed with her theater background, Ms. Molleur will assist you in tapping into your community's story and weaving your own tale through the brownfield redevelopment process. Our second expert, HCI's President Maria Kohler, is a well-established brownfield practitioner and an innovator in the industry. She has overseen the investigation and remediation of hundreds of brownfield sites across the nation. Ms. Kohler also teaches a graduate-level brownfields course at NJIT. So there may be some students in here, so if you are, make sure you told her you attended. They say that all good stories should connect with an audience's shared path. It is this context that connects us to who we were and can sometimes shape who we will become. Maria Kohler will show you how the historical context and stories of a site can be a driving force in the brownfield redevelopment process. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Elise.
Thanks, Fatima, and to the rest of the team as well for the introduction and making sure that everything runs smoothly today. And thank you all to all of the attendees who took the time out of their day today to tune into this webinar. I'm super excited to be speaking on such a fun and creative topic like storytelling that can be tied to our specialty, which is brownfields. Also, happy International Day of Forests. Just learned that, so I had to throw it in. So we're going to dive into the full definition of brownfields in this presentation, but the main thing to take away from the definition is that brownfield sites are potentially contaminated pieces of land that are underused. So this is a general outline of the presentation for today. I'm hoping that if you take one thing away from this webinar, It's that storytelling is critical to gaining financial resources, partnerships, and community support for your brownfield project. But there's so much more to it, and we're going to explore that. We'll discuss the important role of brownfield sites in our country's history, the general outline of stories and what makes them interesting to us, then go over some narrative structures using a movie example that I would think most of us have watched. From there, we're going to connect the art of storytelling to the topic of brownfields, identifying key audience members in the brownfield redevelopment process and discussing data, emotion, and brownfield champions. So if you've seen all of the advertising that our wonderful team has done for this webinar, you've probably read this fantastic quote that my colleague Kaylin had found. According to the wife of the very well-loved Mr. Rogers, he kept a quote from Sister Mary Lou Kaunaki in his wallet that read, "There isn't anyone you couldn't love once you've heard this story." Can this work for places, sites, and buildings too? Maria Kohler, adjunct professor at NJIT and president of Hydrotechnology Consultants, Inc., is going to take us through the story of America's industrial activities that resulted in brownfield sites and tell us about some concepts involved in relaying the stories and importance of these places.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Elise, and the entire NJI team for inviting me to participate in this very important webinar. It's great to be here. So let's get started. As the title of my presentation indicates, compelling brownfield stories often include two concepts used by historians: deep history and path dependency. In this context, deep history illuminates forces that brought about changes to the environment, environmental consciousness, and environmental activism. Path dependency is the notion that established pathways determine future developments. Today, via storytelling, we will explore these concepts and the important role of brownfield sites in our nation's trajectory, as well as that of one of my favorite cities. The first story is illuminated by deep history and begins on February 23rd, 1945 in Iwo Jima, Japan. The greatest generation rose to the existential challenge of their time by summoning courage, a can-do spirit, and technological genius. Joining the community of free nations, they defeated fascism and created a new world order grounded in international law and multilateral institutions. How did they accomplish this improbable feat against such overwhelming odds? They had a shared purpose, a vision, and a desire to leave the world a better place for future generations. While there is no doubt that they achieved victory on a grand scale, they unwittingly created another set of problems. Lacking environmental consciousness, the greatest generation bequeathed to future generations a gathering storm of crises: climate change, ecosystem collapse, and environmental degradation, of which brownfields are a significant part. Across the nation in distressed urban centers and rural outposts, it has been estimated that more than 1 million brownfield sites are being underutilized or have been left lying fallow. These hulking vestiges of our industrial past house the public memory of our nation's precipitous rise as a manufacturing powerhouse, as well as the environmental consequences of frenetic productivity. The DNA of the nation is written in their discarded architectural bones. While we experience brownfields as a national issue, actually the entire world is a brownfield. Therefore, reclamation, along with regeneration, resiliency, preservation, and sustainability, require nothing less than a global 21st century moonshot and an evolution in how we deploy capital and technology and legislate for the environmental and social good. In 1962, President John F. Kennedy, a World War II Purple Heart recipient, in his moonshot speech, spoke about the seemingly unsurmountable challenge of his time. We choose to go to the moon, he said, and do other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one we are willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win. We, the would-be greenest generations, are challenged by the example of the greatest to raise our environmental consciousness and rise to the existential threats of our time, including the reclamation of millions of brownfield sites across the globe. So what will our 21st century moonshot look like? Like nothing we've seen before. Rather than looking to the moon for inspiration, we will delve deep into data produced by human endeavors to change the way we perceive the world and make decisions about climate change, ecosystem collapse, and environmental degradation. Brownfield remediation will become informed by big data and AI. We will use smarter and faster investigation techniques to remediate the world faster and more cost-effectively. We will supplant the business as usual approach and replace it with triple bottom line thinking, a mindset that no longer unconsciously externalizes environmental and social costs simply because the cost of doing so is catastrophic. The science has spoken, the evidence is overwhelming. We need a brave new world of smart, conscious government and capital to fund our 21st century moonshot. So why have I taken you on a journey from the mid-20th century to the dawn of the 21st? To tell you that our 21st century moonshot is already underway. You are living in the golden age of sustainability, environmental justice, and brownfield redevelopment. In 2021, President Biden signed the bipartisan infrastructure law, a once-in-a-generation investment in national infrastructure. Implicit in the funding priorities of the legislation are linkages between climate change mitigation strategies, brownfield redevelopment, remediation, and environmental justice, resulting in some instances in clean energy projects being proposed on former brownfield sites located in underserved and energy transition communities. In 2022, President Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act, also known as the Climate Bill, which is the largest investment in climate change mitigation and climate resiliency in the history of the world. The Climate Bill includes incentives that can be stacked with brownfield grants, such as $27 billion to finance green projects in underserved communities. So, how will you tell the story of your city or town and site in the golden age of brownfields? To give you some ideas, let me tell you a story about one of my favorite places. I am choosing to use Newark as an example of deep history and storytelling, as it is part of my deep personal history. My maternal grandparents arrived from Italy and chose Newark rather than New York City as a place to put down roots. My paternal great-grandfather was the last maker of hand-rolled cigars in the city with a shop on Broad Street. My parents met in Newark and after marrying, lived in the projects along with first, second, and third generation immigrant families and with all their extended family members living nearby. I grew up hearing stories about the charms of Newark like those told by the celebrated author Philip Roth, a Newark native himself, in his novel, American Pastoral. But what is so special about Newark? Lyndon B. Johnson, during a 1966 speech commemorating Newark's 300th anniversary, said the following: the story of Newark is America's story. It is the story of colonization, independence, growth, and maturity. It is the story of a brave people. Following the Revolutionary War period, Newark began to develop in ways that were harbingers of its future greatness. At the town crossroads, broad and market streets, clusters of taverns, stores, government offices, and neat two-story homes with backyard gardens extended in each direction. It was during this era that Market Street was named. It naturally evolved into an area where merchants met with farmers and purchased butter, grain, meat, and produce. Following the construction in the late 1700s of the bridges spanning the Passaic and Hudson Rivers, Newark was established as the hub of northern New Jersey, where manufacturing and industry were already taking root. More than any other advancement, and here we're talking about path dependence, the introduction of these two bridges placed Newark unmistakably on the path to growth and urbanity. America, then a fledgling nation in which more than 90% of men still farmed for a living, stood poised for enormous change. No town would transform more or more rapidly than Newark. Major rail and waterway infrastructure projects of the pre-Civil War era left lasting marks all over increasingly urban northern New Jersey. Many great inventors and industrialists set up operations in Newark, such as the likes of Thomas Edison, who had at least 5 shops in Newark. Seth Boyden, pictured here, deemed by Thomas Edison as one of America's great inventors, had designed machines for making nails, brads, tacks, and cutting files by the age of 21 in Newark. Moses Combs, a Presbyterian preacher, tanner, shoemaker, founder of his own church and school, zealous abolitionist and temperance advocate, and the town pound master in charge of rounding up stray cows, sheep, pigs, and animals. Combs gained a reputation as a master shoemaker as far as the Deep South, helping to establish him as a wealthy man and Newark as the shoe capital of America. Franklin Murphy, founder of Murphy Varnish Company, the governor of New Jersey, the Essex County Parks Commissioner, and a progressive reformer of labor and housing laws. Brad Tuttle, in his book, How Newark Became Newark, writes, Newark's story is that of urban America in extremis. No community hopped aboard the runaway train that was the Industrial Revolution as wholeheartedly as Newark. In its embrace of manufacturing, Newark grew as quickly as any city. When the United States rose to prominence as a world power, it did so on the backs of cities like Newark. Then, Newark experienced the perfect storm of 20th century urban troubles: deeply entrenched corruption, industrial abandonment, white flight, racial conflict, soaring crime rates, fiscal insolvency, and dire poverty. Newark's saga reflects the roller coaster ride of every city USA, only with a steeper rise, sharper turns, and a much more dramatic plunge. Newark's fate is inextricably bound to the way we choose to tell its story. When America fought its civil rights battles, it did so in cities like Newark. When America abandoned its industrial roots, it did so at the expense of cities like Newark. And as evidenced by incentives in the Infrastructure Bill and the Climate Act, as America rises to the challenges of the 21st century, it will once again look to cities like Newark. The story of America is the story of Newark is America's story, the good and the bad. It makes sense that the cycle of American greatness and weakness would find its full expression in places like Newark. Newark's story does not end with industrial decline. and a relinquishment of the future of manufacturing to far-flung places. In fact, Newark and America's second precipitous rise is dependent in part on the symbols of their decline, brownfields. Newark should embrace its strategic position and proud past and meld these assets into a unified vision for the future. Newark's brownfield sites, once reclaimed, can be places where sustainable manufacturing produces thousands of jobs, where artisans can once again craft high-end goods, where urban farms take root, where visionaries and entrepreneurs imagine the next technological breakthrough, and where children are taught to embrace the city's past and become agents of its exciting future. Picture here is the reclaimed Murphy Varnish building, which now houses luxury apartments and professional offices. Murphy Varnish was the first global export of the United States and put U.S. manufacturing on the map. The public memory of Newark's proud industrial past and its future potential resides in its 19th century architectural bones. As with the promise of Newark, using imagination and storytelling, and by employing brownfields as the building blocks of a sustainable future, we can make a better world informed by triple bottom line thinking for the next generations. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Let me get my screen back up. Poundmaster. I think that's the first time I've heard that term. What a job running around and collecting sheep and cows running all over the city. Thanks, Maria, for interpreting the story of our country in a way that kind of explains the presence of these brownfield sites that are everywhere. And I also really liked the phrasing golden age of brownfields, because the term itself is not pretty. And it kind of sheds hope and light on topics or this opportunity of open doors that, we can really get involved with. All right, so everyone loves a good story, but what really draws us in? Well, knowing your audience and catering to their likes is a huge part of storytelling, especially with brownfields. If you love the stories you tell, you will convey more emotion and better appeal to your audience. While there are many technical aspects of the brownfield redevelopment process, telling your story with emotion and passion is something that will help show you as relatable and real. And the characters of your story are just as important as the brownfield site itself. Who's being affected? Who are the heroes? And what are the obstacles that they must overcome? The three-act structure is a model used in narrative fiction that divides a story into 3 parts or acts, usually referred to as a setup, confrontation, and resolution. The model is popularized by American author and speaker Sid Field. So when I was making this presentation, I was trying to think of a very highly popular film example for people to follow along, and that is Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. We're going to be discussing the 1971 musical film that stars Gene Wilder as the confectioner, not the 2005 film with Johnny Depp or the 2023 film with Timothée Chalamet. I was actually running through this presentation with a colleague, and they pointed out that I had switched up Gene Wilder with Gene Simmons. Whoops, quite a switch up. Following Sid Field's 3-act structure, the introduction of the story identifies Charlie Bucket, who lives in poverty with his family. Grandpa Joe, a former employee of the Wonka factory, explains to Charlie that the gates of the factory remain locked to prevent further sabotage from spies who were sent to steal Wonka's recipes. Following years of privacy, Wonka announces that 5 golden tickets were hidden in chocolate Wonka bars. The finders of the tickets were to receive a factory tour and a lifetime supply of chocolate, kind of like a child's version of scratch-off tickets. As for the rising action, 4 tickets are found by Augustus Gloop, Veruca Salt, Violet Beauregard, and Mike TV. The final ticket is found by Charlie, who chooses Grandpa Joe as his chaperone. The ticket winners arrive at the factory and are greeted by Wonka himself. The crisis of the story is when each child's character flaws kind of causes them to give in to temptation and act naughty, resulting in their unusual elimination, for lack of a better term. Our following action is that following the downfall of the other children, Wonka announces that Charlie has passed the morality test and gifts his factory to Charlie and his family upon retirement. Now, we've skipped quite a few details in this story, such as the chocolate-covered Augustus being sucked up a pipe that he doesn't quite fit through, Veruca's demand that her father buys her a magic goose, or Violet swelling up into a giant blueberry. If you've never seen the film, this might sound like a fever dream to you. Honestly, the boat scene down the Chocolate River was terrifying to me as a child, and I recently learned that the actors in that scene had no idea it was going to happen, so the fear on their faces was very real. But overall, the story details I've mentioned are the key plot points. The traditional 3-act narrative structure is typically how people tell their stories. Or if you're like me, you have 50 different acts and 100 different details that are never important to getting to the point of the story. This structure is common in Western film and literature, but it's missing data, emotion, empowerment, challenges, and a further dive into the characters. Pauline Clegg is a Yeagle woman from the north coast of New South Wales, an Australian state. She has recognized and vocalized that Indigenous storytelling has different rules, especially in film. The 5B Indigenous storytelling includes a setup, character introduction, rising action leading to the crisis or climax, and falling action that includes the future of characters and their settings. So using the 5B Indigenous storytelling structure, let's break down Willy Wonka even more. Going back to the land of the Oompa Loompas, our Once Upon a Time presents us with several questions. Who's Charlie? Who does he live with? And why is his family living in poverty with 4 grandparents sharing one massive bed? What sort of challenges do the Buckets face in their small home? Who's Willy Wonka and why did he close his factory to the public? The introduction comes when Wonka announces that 5 golden tickets were hidden in his Wonka bars. Children and adults scramble to buy Wonka bars and win this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and we're introduced to the characters, the children, their parents and guardians, and Wonka himself. We can see the rising action of the story when Charlie finds the last golden ticket. The crisis or climax can be viewed as 4 of the 5 children who are eliminated from the factory tour one by one due to their character flaws, or it's kind of seen as the 7 deadly sins: gluttony, greed, sloth, and pride. The falling action is when Charlie passes the morality test and is the inheritor of Wonka's factory. And the future of the characters following the falling action raises some questions as well. How does the Bucket family feel about moving into the factory? Is the factory doing well under Charlie and Grandpa Joe's supervision? And will they open the factory back to the public again? Excuse me. As much as I would love to go on about Mr. Wonka, what we're really here to learn about is the importance of telling your story with brownfield sites, brownfield redevelopment, and brownfield challenges. It's in the title and throughout this presentation, so let's go over the definition of a brownfield. According to the EPA, a brownfield is real property, the expansion, redevelopment, or reuse of which may be complicated by the presence or potential presence of a hazardous substance, pollutant, or contaminant. Some states have their own definitions of brownfields that may differ slightly from the EPA's definition. For example, in New Jersey, brownfields are specified as commercial and/or industrial properties. Generally, brownfield definitions identify the properties as underused or unused with confirmed or potential contamination present. A brownfield champion is another phrase that I'm going to be using later in the presentation. And to clarify its definition, this is an entity or individual whose brownfield site has successfully gone through the brownfield redevelopment process. Something that confuses a lot of people, including myself sometimes, are the differences between Superfunds and brownfields. There is a lot of overlay between a Superfund site and a brownfield site. When we look at the overall Superfund goals as defined by the US EPA, we can see that these goals are very similar to the goals of redeveloping a brownfield site. When we redevelop brownfields, the overall goals are to protect human and environmental health, involve communities in the redevelopment process, and return these brownfields to productive use for the community. A Superfund site is a location that has been heavily contaminated by hazardous materials like chemical waste or toxic substances. These sites are designated as Superfund if the federal government is involved or plans to be involved in the cleanup efforts. Many of these sites are listed on the US EPA's National Priorities List, or NPL. So overall, these sites are so badly contaminated that the federal government has set aside specific funds to address them with direct government oversight. They are the, quote, worst of the worst. Pictured on the right is the Valley of the Drums in 1979, a 23-acre toxic waste site in Kentucky that was identified as a Superfund site. According to Love Canal activist Lois Gibbs, Love Canal, another very famous Superfund site, looked like a suburban community, while, quote, Valley of the Drums became the visualization of the problem. A brownfield site refers to properties that may have potential environmental contaminants, but they can be reused and redeveloped with proper cleanup and management. Brownfields receive major attention from state and tribal response programs with a focus on cleaning up and revitalizing these sites. These are the sites that don't quite fit the definition of a Superfund. We're going to go through some examples of some brownfield sites throughout this presentation. While Charlie Bucket and Wonka's story is fictional, brownfield sites are very real. So why would we tell the stories of brownfield sites? Well, through this, we can articulate our ideas for the redevelopment process and our visions for site reuse. We can gather input from the audience or other storytellers. We can appeal to different audience members or stakeholders, catalyze community involvement by drawing upon emotions and passion. It's a necessary step in grant writing that, when done well, can greatly improve the quality of your grants and help you to gain funding, partnerships, and grantors. And we can also support underrepresented voices. Had a little mute button there. All right. So brownfields, specifically former industrial sites, are disproportionately located in areas that are occupied by low-income individuals, people of color, and linguistically isolated communities. The individuals in these communities experience environmental injustice as a result of these sites. Relaying the stories of underrepresented voices, as well as giving them the microphone to share their own stories, can help get marginalized people and communities heard, seen, and acknowledged. Our goal with storytelling is to help these people and their challenges be heard so that actions can be taken to solve the present problems and avoid the future issues. Storytelling is a call to action. It's important that we boost the voices and not become the voice. We don't want to speak for the marginalized groups, but rather share their stories and the facts to amplify their own voices. So what exactly can storytelling do for marginalized voices? Well, speaking is one thing, but tapping into the innate human desire to learn and connect through stories is even more powerful. Due to systemic inequalities throughout history, the stories of marginalized people were never introduced to the mainstream. But with today's technology, social media, and quicker lines of communication, storytelling helps to break down the structures that led to communities initially being marginalized. People from communities that aren't being heard are often used to their concerns being brushed off. Giving these voices a platform to speak about their experiences in a setting where people are sure to listen and absorb can restore lost confidence in one's own voice. It's also in our nature as human beings to form in-groups and generalizations about people from communities outside of our own. Storytelling breaks down those walls, and it makes people more willing to have their biases challenged and their understanding of other communities shifted. And finally, stories can really place the listener in the shoes of the teller. If the teller is the same person or the same community over and over again, we're never going to learn about the struggles and desires of those whose voices are not often listened to. The experience of being excluded, ignored, and oppressed is difficult to grasp for those who haven't experienced it. But if they can live the experience through the eyes and words of the storyteller, the path to greater empathy becomes clear and open. Speaking of Newark, New Jersey, Dr. Anna I. Baptista grew up in a place called Ironbound, located in Newark, New Jersey. The name references the rail lines flanking an industrialized landscape that is also a vibrant community of poor and working class people of color and immigrants. The neighborhood was created out of marsh that is part of the New Jersey Meadowlands. Although this area once thrived as part of a complex estuary, it was historically viewed as treacherous lands, filled in with garbage dumps and tamed to accommodate the industry along its waterways. Its steel-girded borders and the toxic Passaic River were both respected and feared. Excuse me. The underbelly infrastructure of the metropolitan area, consisting of prisons, trash incinerators, the seaport and airport, and sewage, chemical, and power plants were all placed on these marginal lands. Dr. Anna Baptista refers to these as sacrifice zones, or areas where residents are subjected to heightened levels of pollution and hazardous materials, despite the adverse impacts on their health. These sacrifice zones coexist alongside concentrated pockets of poor communities of color that had been long segregated by decades of industrial pollution, unfair housing prices, and economic disinvestment. Dr. Baptista and the Ironbound Community Corporation conduct toxic tours, now referred to as environmental justice tours. These are tours of Newark for students and other interested groups, other interested individuals or groups of people. So as they guide people through the city, they're not just telling stories of horrors of environmental destruction, but also making a call to action for people both within the community and outside. In her personal journey towards environmental justice, Dr. Baptista explains that she has found her voice by trying to make sense of the ways that her own community was ravaged by racism, inequality, industrialization, capitalism, and consumption. With these tours, the narratives of the impacted residents can shape action and support systemic change. When we have a successful brownfield redevelopment project, those brownfield champions should shout about it from the rooftops because that storytelling can inspire others and show them that these sites aren't just black holes that we should stay away from. These are sites with a history, with characters, with rising action and the climax that we can be a part of. Storytelling is a vital part of the brownfields redevelopment process, not just for an organization or developers, but also for the residents, elected officials, property owners, grantors, and so on. We're sharing our success stories to show possibilities for other brownfields, inspire other groups or individuals, and demonstrate the communal impacts. If you tell your story loud and proud, use that emotion, appeal to the audiences, and weave that data into a narrative, you're taking a necessary step and gaining financial resources, partnerships, and community support for your project. No matter who the intended audience is, people will be listening. There are several audience members or stakeholders involved in the brownfield redevelopment process. We can ask ourselves what factors we think the following stakeholders are most concerned with: elected officials, property owners, developers or investors, residents, and grantors. In chat, choose one or two of these stakeholders and write down a single word or phrase that you think that stakeholder is most concerned with. So just as an example, while I give some time for people to write in chat, as an environmentalist, if I'm looking at these redevelopment projects, I'm really concerned with the quality and status of the environment during and after. Yeah, absolutely. Return on investment is huge. And we're going to kind of go through each one of these stakeholders one by one and identify their main focuses, their main concerns. Residents, yep. Safety, health, traffic, property value, health and safety, profit, absolutely. Air and water quality for residents, yeah, huge. I mean, of course, I would say that we're all residents somewhere, so it's definitely a big part of what we're interested in and our concerns. All right, awesome. Thanks for that, guys. All right, I'm gonna keep going. Typically, elected officials are focused on the economy and the economic impact of these brownfield sites. They want to see the creation of jobs. This can include jobs created and needed through the redevelopment process, such as bringing consultants to investigate your site and remediate or clean up the property and/or buildings. Architects that will develop blueprints for your proposed building, or contractors that actually come in and build and create your vision. On top of that, the end use of a site can create jobs such as retail employees at a brand new shopping center or giving companies more space with a larger office building. They're interested in any sales and property taxes that arise from the redevelopment and improvement of these sites. Like most people, they want the removal of blights or eyesores from their communities. And of course, as economic officials who are elected by the people, they're concerned with the general legacy. Getting involved with the brownfield redevelopment process and being a part of a brownfield success story or being a brownfield champion can help boost people's perceptions of these officials. Spring allergies, I swear they started already. Overall, property owners are concerned with their family legacy with a focus on property value, resale potential, lease rates, free money, a clean bill of health, and what kind of inheritance they're going to leave behind. Developers and investors are driven by a sense of FOMO, or fear of missing out. They want to know about return on investment, neighborhood potential, land value, lease rates, and market demand. Residents just want something to love. They're interested in livability, safety, a sense of place and community, the character of their neighborhood, blight or eyesore elimination, a good quality of life, and nearby amenities. Above all, grantors want to see their money well spent. They want results, shareable information, groundbreaking ceremonies, and stories that show all of that, which are what we call success stories. There are federal, state, and local funds available for different steps of the brownfield redevelopment process, such as assessment and investigation, planning, engaging the community, cleanup, and redevelopment of the site for different things like affordable housing, open space and public recreation, stormwater management, medical facilities, and so on. There's so many opportunities. On the screen are some examples of funding sources, also known as the EPA MARC grants. MARC stands for Multipurpose Assessment Revolving Loan Fund and Cleanup. It's important to note that there really is an unprecedented amount of money that's committed to the brownfield redevelopment process, which is also really exciting. And for these grants in particular, that is all thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure law. Typically, these grants will have application guidelines, and this will usually include adding your narrative. We should think of this as the spirit of what the grantor is looking for. It's very important to tell your story here. While there's more information to be included in the grant application, this is also a time for storytelling. How is your community different from other applicants? How is your project different? People are listening. And remember, ordinary doesn't get funded. A good story will make you stand out among the other applicants. One of the services that NJIT's TAB program provides is review of grant applications. Our team has lots of experience and has reviewed hundreds of these, so they developed some tips to share as well. If you're interested in learning more, feel free to send us an email or check out our website for resources. A good story can build excitement and draw on passion in the different audiences that we've just discussed to assist them in imagining the futures of these sites. This is a former landfill located in Astoria, Oregon that was active from 1965 to 1985, and then it sat vacant for several more years. Looking at this brownfield, can you picture this site following redevelopment? What does it look like? Are people there? And what kind of jobs were created with this new development? So you can go ahead and write in chat what you think this large plot of land could be used for. Maybe it's something that really appeals to you. Maybe it's something that appeals to your community. But if you kind of want to jot down some ideas, that'd be great. Oregonians, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Oregonians love to be outside. So park, solar farm, mixed use with retail on the bottom and homes on top. Wow. Indoor roller rink, awesome. Community solar wind farm, recreational project, skate park, recreation park, dog park. Would love a dog park. Huge dog person here. Yeah, these are all awesome. Actually, fun fact, lots of movies were filmed fully or partially in Astoria, Oregon. And this includes The Goonies, Kindergarten Cop, and Free Willy. Awesome answers. Thanks, guys. So this story begins in 1978 when the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality required closure of the landfill because of a discharge to a nearby creek and wetland. For over 30 years, the site remained in limbo as final closure and capping of the landfill, which is a method used to prevent human exposure to contaminated soils, was found to be too costly for the city. However, in 2013, a win-win-win solution was conceptualized. Multiple public and private entities came together for the redevelopment of this brownfield to benefit the community. Following the capping and closing of the inactive landfill, the brownfield went through the redevelopment process, and the former landfill was transformed into a brand new sports complex, completed in 2014. This created a revenue source for the Astoria School District while also freeing up developable land for a much-needed expansion of the nearby Columbia Memorial Hospital. Go Fighting Fishermen. Gathering, interpreting, and displaying data is crucial to the brownfield redevelopment process. During processes like community engagement and planning, data is collected about the site, community members, and more. This can include demographics such as average incomes, race, population, average age, as well as local information such as the amount of affordable housing in the area, how many brownfield sites are in the community or town, and why are there so many or so few, land acreage, and the community's goals and visions for site redevelopment. This data is crucial to writing grants and defining your site. But data is just statistics and numbers, pie charts and line graphs until you weave that into a story. By effectively telling our site's story, we create better avenues to access funding, develop relationships with stakeholders and partners, and make our grant applications stand out. Have you ever sat through a lecture, a ceremony, or a public gathering where the passion and emotion of the speaker begins to give you those same feelings inside, or maybe spark some different emotions within you? Or have you seen a speaker on television connect with their audience through the use of emotions, whether that be excitement, sadness, fear, anger, adoration, or frustration? Emotion is used by speakers and storytellers to improve public engagement and appeal to a more diverse audience. It is used by all different kinds of storytellers, from presidents and politicians to actors and activists. Let's take Ke Kwan, Greta Thunberg, and Martin Luther King Jr. as examples. I won't go into the details of their speeches and stories, but Ke Kwan's 2023 Oscar speech about his battles in Hollywood and self-image, Greta's consistent frustration and determination with climate action, and Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech about the nation's failure to keep founding promises to Black Americans are great examples of storytellers who tactfully and genuinely displayed heavy emotion in prior speeches as a way of telling a story, reaching diverse audiences, and giving people a voice. We're going to work through the Sid Field 3-act narrative structure using a real-life example of a brownfield. Take a look at this site. The top picture was captured in April 2012 and shows a former industrial building sitting unused on a piece of land in Johnson City, New York. The setup of this story tells about the post-war industrial decline, leading to factory closures throughout Johnson City. These abandoned structures stood as a reminder of hard times for 40 years. Our rising action is that the sister factories, Century and Sunrise, are sold to investors. The site is cleaned up and the existing structure is repurposed. Our falling action, shown in the bottom picture taken in September 2019, shows a Century Sunrise redevelopment which opened in 2018 and provided affordable housing to residents. Here's some more before and after pictures of the sister factory buildings that were transformed. Personally, I think it's really nice to hear about the redevelopment of former industrial buildings, especially into great uses like affordable housing. You ever drive past a gorgeous old factory or building with amazing architecture and it's just sitting there with graffiti, with the windows blown out, and you just wonder what could be there? But from the background I just gave in the last slide, we're really missing the history, emotion, data, inspiration, vision, and characters. So let's dive deeper. We're going to break down our brownfield story even more using the 5B Indigenous storytelling method. Once upon a time, there lived the Endicott Johnson Corporation. I'm going to refer to Endicott Johnson as EJ, which is quite fitting for what you're going to learn about the company, as EJ also stands for environmental justice in our field. At one time, EJ was the largest producer of footwear in the US. At its peak, EJ operated dozens of factories in the Triple Cities area, consisting of Binghamton, Johnson City, and Endicott, as well as outside the region. By World War I, it was the world's largest shoe manufacturer, employing more than 30,000 workers. It was the goal of the founders of EJ to create housing opportunities for their employees close to where they worked. The company treated its workers fairly, and the president envisioned a campus with healthcare, jobs, a place for recreation, and a sense of community. EJ was a major cultural and economic force in the development of Johnson City in New York. Our introduction to this story begins when the EJ factories closed throughout the city due to the post-war industrial decline. And the abandoned structures stood there for 40 years as a reminder of the hard times to the residents. Then the sister factories Century and Sunrise were sold to investors, the site was assessed, and contamination was identified. The structural remains were intact, the site was cleaned up, and the existing structure was repurposed, providing the climax of our story. The Century Sunrise redevelopment opens in 2018, providing affordable housing options within Johnson City. The developers and owners of this site also envisioned recreating the goals of the EJ Corporation and its president. While bringing these historic buildings back to their former glory, they also revitalized these buildings with residential and commercial mixed uses, with the hope of adding to the community's vision of creating a vital downtown 24/7 neighborhood in the heart of Johnson City. The land was cleaned up and given back to help the working class by providing affordable housing and a place for recreation. This project really does come full circle. The redevelopment attracts new residents and furthers development within the city. Many former industrial sites have since been remediated and given new life, providing needs such as affordable housing and public recreation space. So in your opinion, which brownfield story hooked you in more? Maybe one that introduces more characters, background, emotion? So now that we've unraveled the story of a very real brownfield site that had such a prominent part in Johnson City's history and a full circle redevelopment for greater community use, we've reached the end of today's discussion. There's so many aspects and qualities to a good story, and they should be used when we talk about brownfields. So after you sign off, I hope you'll keep these main points in mind. Brownfields are vacant or underutilized sites with confirmed or potential contamination. We tell stories to articulate our ideas and visions, appeal to different audience members with different interests, support underrepresented voices, and catalyze community involvement. Don't ignore the narrative portion of your grant application. Use it to tell the story of your site and the people in your community. And finally, telling our stories is critical to gaining financial resources and partnerships. We hope to convey emotion and empower others in our audience. We want to tie the factual data to our narrative. We aim to engage each of our audience members by appealing to their wants and wishes, and we wish to imagine a better future for these sites. As mentioned previously, our team has experience reviewing hundreds of grant applications and can help you through the grant writing process. Every person and every site has a story, and we can provide assistance to help you tell that story to better navigate through your brownfield redevelopment process. NJIT TAB, Technical Assistance to Brownfield Communities, is made up of a multidisciplinary team of engineers, environmental scientists like myself, and social scientists that tailor our assistance to your specific community needs. We've helped hundreds of communities throughout the country with their brownfield projects. Assistance is all provided free of charge to local governments and nonprofit organizations. We're provided funding by the EPA so that we can in turn provide these free educational forums and workshops, boot camps, conferences, and webinars like this one. NJIT has been an EPA TAB provider since 2008 and is currently the TAB provider for EPA Regions 2 and 4. So what do you think? Can we learn to love a site once we get to know it? Thank you. Awesome. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you, Elise and Maria, for those informative presentations. The power of storytelling, especially when connected to the stories of our past, pardon my pun, presents such an opportunity to revitalize our communities. I also love the idea of, the brownfield champions, how they could share their success stories to further spur more positive changes. With that, let's see if we have any questions from our attendees today. As I stated earlier, feel free to use the Q&A module at the bottom of your screen. After the webinar, should anyone present today have any additional questions or comments, feel free to utilize our post-webinar survey or connect with us on the NJIT TAB LinkedIn page. You may also visit our website at www.njit.edu/tab or other social media platforms to access more information, resources, and news. While we wait for everyone to post their questions, I want to talk about some upcoming events. So Elise, if you could move slide forward. First, we have an upcoming webinar coming up for specifically for those attendees from New York State. They may be interested in it. On March 28th at 11 a.m. Eastern, join us for Life After BOA. I believe we have Carrie here today who could be able to speak on that and what this webinar is about.
Well, hello everyone. My name is Carrie Martin. I am pleased to announce that I will be speaking at Life After BOA with Leslie Zlatev of the Department of State in New York State, and we're going to be talking about after you've received a brownfield opportunity area designation in the state, how you can leverage that to get additional funding, rebuild some partnerships, and really get into the meat of remediating your site and implementing your site reuse vision. I hope you can join us on March 28th at 11. Thank you.
Great, thanks. We look forward to anyone who's able to join us for that webinar. For those that can't actually make it to our webinars, we post our recordings along with presentations and related resources and links on our website, again, at www.njit.edu/tab/webinars. We just posted our most recent webinars, Pop-Up Progress, Unveiling the Magic of Temporary Brownfield Makeovers and Brownfield Contaminants in Human Health. We should also be having soon our most recent Climate Change and Brownfields 101 webinar up as well. Feel free to view those recordings after today's webinar or explore the site to find a vast library of resources, links, and other informative videos. Along with webinars, NJIT TAB also participates in many in-person events throughout the year in EPA's Regions 2 and 4. For example, for Region 2, Kaylin Bruno, our Director for Environmental Services for NJIT TAB, will be having 2 events in April in the Mohawk Valley area, Kaylin, would you like to speak on that?
Sure. For anyone in the upstate New York area, the Mohawk Valley Brownfields Developer Summit is a great event for Brownfields programming and networking. We are having a Brownfield Basics leading up to that on April 10th, and you'll be able to see Elise and I in person at Herkimer College the 23rd and 24th of April.
Great, thank you. And then for Region 4, Sean Vroom, our director for NJIT TAB, will be participating in a 2-day immersive Brownfields bootcamp for Kentucky communities to provide an introduction to downtown revitalization and the Brownfield redevelopment process. Bootcamp topics will include Brownfield funding opportunities, community engagement strategies, data collection and utilization, EPA Brownfield grant writing, including common mistakes, and consultant procurement. Mimi should be able to post the registration link if you're local to that area and wish to participate. And if you've learned any tips from today's storytelling webinar, that's a great, if you're local, it's a great event to kind of combo. So you have some tips for how to write your grant, and you'll get even more tips in that way too. So hopefully we can meet you all in person. If you're not local to these events, we would love to come to visit you in your communities. We can provide a multitude of services from one-on-one technical assistance to in-person events such as our Brownfield Basics workshop. If you're interested, feel free to reach out to NJIT TAB at tab@njit.edu. Our social media information is also, if you could go to the next slide, I'm sorry. Next slide, I'm sorry about that. Our social media information is also shown here. Be sure to connect with us for news and to know if we'll be in your area in the future. If you go back to the previous slide I mentioned earlier, that's actually some of our webinars we've recently posted, as well as the link to where on the website you could find them. So let's see, do we have any questions? So again, I want to remind you as well, if you want to actually verbally speak your question, you could also, if you go down to the bottom of your screen, you'll see reactions and you'll be able to raise your hand. And so if you raise your hand, we'll be able to unmute you so you could verbally ask it. Or if you're more comfortable to ask it in the Q&A box down below, you're free to do so as well. So our first question we have here is, in your opinion, what's more powerful when telling your Brownfield story? Emotion or hard facts? Or combo of both?
Maria, feel free if you want to chime in, but I was going to say definitely a combination of both. I think you really need to incorporate emotion into it to appeal to certain people, maybe like residents. If you kind of, appeal to their concerns and what they really care about, like a quality of life and safety, you can use emotion for that, definitely. But also hard facts are huge for maybe other audience members. So I would definitely say a combination of both, and it really does depend on who you're speaking to and who's listening.
Great. Do you have any insight, Maria, as well?
I mean, yeah, I basically agree that you need both. You can tell the hard facts with emotion when that's appropriate. But a combination of both. And when giving the hard facts, it's great to use graphs and charts and, as many visualization tools so that, even the hard facts will become more compelling that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that makes sense. Totally. Okay. Our next question. How do you find the right storyteller?
Oh, our contact information is right here. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I think that's tough because, again, different kind of audience members want to hear and see and know different pieces of information. But yeah, definitely a tough question. I think that, someone who's able to incorporate everything that we've talked about in this presentation, like emotion, data, weaving that into a narrative so it's not just kind of throwing pie charts at your face, while also, keeping in mind the concerns of who you're talking to. And then on top of that, amplifying underrepresented voices because, sometimes that they might not have a platform, and we can definitely help kind of boost that, amplify that, and have them tell their own stories, share it, because they can reach a community sometimes that we can't.
Yeah, and I also believe that you know, a good storyteller is first and foremost a good listener. So they need to hear the story from you and then be able to translate that into good writing, good data visualization. But if they're not listening to you and they're just going to tell the story they want to tell, then the character, you know, the unique character of your town and what the people of your town want will not be represented. So
yeah,
when you interview, you know, someone to write your grant, see how well they listen to your concerns.
That's good advice. I like that.
Oh, definitely. Like Elise said earlier, amplify the voice. Don't be the voice.
Right.
Great. Another question. As part of a brownfield storytelling, do you tell people the contaminants they could be exposed to?
Absolutely, you have to tell the truth. But you tell them what contaminants are there and then the different remedies available to mitigate the risk. So you have to educate the community about what does risk mitigation mean. It doesn't mean always remediating down to absolutely clean. In fact, it almost never does, especially in New Jersey. So you have to explain the different, you know, processes like capping or vapor mitigation systems or in situ remediation. And again, you know, these are very technical concepts, but they have to be explained in a way that the lay person can understand. So that's done with what I teach in my course, is creating a conceptual site model. And a conceptual site model can sometimes be a visual representation of the source, nature, extent, migration pathway, and receptor to contamination. And so it's how you represent what is scary to the layperson. It's how you communicate it will determine how they react.
Yeah, I second that.
That makes sense. No, definitely. Okay. I think that's the questions for now. Let's see if we hold on a few seconds to see if we'll get any more. I don't see anyone. Is there anyone with their hands raised? I don't think so. All right. Again, if you're unable to answer, have your question answered today, again, you'll feel free to reach out to us via any of these links you see here, either our LinkedIn, our website, our email, or you could even give us a call if you have any questions. We're more than willing to help you out if you need it. Again, we thank you for spending some time with us today. But before I let you go, I want to leave you with an African proverb. It says that when an elder dies, a library burns to the ground. The implication is that they are the keeper of their stories, and if they are not shared, they are lost. Brownfields present a unique opportunity in which we can uncover these stories, and if all goes to plan, we can rewrite their endings. I hope you all have a great day and many successes wherever you are on your Brownfields journey. May you all be Brownfield champions.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.